everybody ran away like this?
I don't know.
Hey, if he already admires your mind, how long can it take before he notices your body?
There's a difference, you know. And people hear all kind of things.
Remember those TV shows you grew up with? How could we forget them? In the 1980s, these shows filled our afternoons and evenings, shaping routines, friendships, and even the way we saw the world. So, why do so few of us talk about them now? It was the kind of show that made you do a double take as a kid. You are watching what is clearly a 10-year-old girl, but she is speaking in a monotone, staring unblinkingly, and occasionally lifting heavy furniture with one hand. Nope, not a horror movie. Just another night with Small Wonder. If you remember it, chances are you still do not know how to explain it to anyone else. And if you forgot about it, well, maybe your brain was just trying to keep up with the rest of the 1980s. Small Wonder was about Vicky, a robot built by her inventor dad, who decides it is totally normal to raise her like a regular daughter. And if you think that plot sounds weird today, imagine watching it on your tiny television back when dial-up was a sci-fi concept. This show was full of strange logic, clunky catchphrases, and the kind of acting that made you feel like everyone on screen knew this was a bit too wild for prime time. And yet somehow it worked. The charm of Small Wonder was not that it was realistic, it was that it was relentlessly optimistic. It imagined a world where a robot child could be part of a suburban family and somehow not cause a nationwide panic. Instead, Vicky would help with chores, attend school, and even teach some valuable life lessons, all without blinking or moving her lips more than a quarter inch. The 80s were a weird time. But here is what made Small Wonder so unforgettable to the people who did grow up watching it. It was about possibility. It told kids that technology could be your friend. It gave families this gentle, bizarre reminder that even in a world full of limitations, someone could build a daughter out of wires and still call it love. And maybe that was comforting, in a way that only made sense if you were watching it from your living room floor with a bowl of cereal at 7 in the morning. You probably forgot it was even real, but it was. And somehow, that makes it even more magical. Now this one. This was the one that made you wish you could stop time. Literally. Because in Out of This World, a teenage girl named Evie could do exactly that. All she had to do was touch her 2 index fingers together and bam! Frozen time, frozen people, frozen chaos. And if you were watching it back then, you probably tried it yourself at least once, just to see if it worked. It did not. Out of This World was part science fiction, part sitcom, and all kinds of weird. Evie's dad was an alien from the planet Antares. Her mom was an ordinary Earthwoman, and their daughter, well, she was stuck somewhere in between. But rather than send her to a lab or make her the subject of some national security emergency, the show just rolled with it. Aliens? Cool. Time powers? Even better. Let us make some sandwiches and talk about our feelings. There was something truly 80s about this show's ability to turn wild sci-fi into relatable suburban drama. You had Evie trying to juggle her powers with her everyday life, sneaking out, dealing with bullies, trying to figure out if she could make her crush like her more by freezing time and fixing everything around her. It was wish fulfillment with a laugh track. And somehow, it made you feel like maybe, just maybe, the universe was bigger than it seemed. Even if that universe lived on your living room screen at 5 o'clock sharp. The show also had this strange innocence to it, like everyone involved knew they were being a little silly, but they meant well. You were not tuning in for high drama. You were tuning in to see what Evie would mess up this week and whether her glowing cube of a father would offer some heartfelt, floaty advice from the sky. It was awkward, wholesome, and deeply comforting. If you forgot about Out of This World, you are not alone. It did not get the reruns. It did not get the merch. But for a few years in the 80s, it gave kids a vision of power, freedom, and alien wisdom wrapped in teenage awkwardness. And in a time when everything felt just a little out of control, it was kind of nice to believe that someone out there could stop the world and fix it. You did not just want to watch Silver Spoons. You wanted to live it. A mansion with its own train set, a video game room that looked like an arcade, a dad who acted more like a big brother than a parent. It was every kid's dream. And for a little while in the 80s, it felt just real enough to chase. Silver Spoons was the kind of show that made you believe in second chances. Ricky Stratton, played by a young and effortlessly cool Ricky Schroeder, was a kid who suddenly found out that his long-lost dad was not just alive, he was rich, fun, and completely unequipped to be a parent. What followed was a series full of heartwarming chaos where father and son tried to build a life together from scratch, one toy train ride at a time. But this was not just about money. Sure, the mansion and gadgets were cool, unforgettable even, but what made Silver Spoons stand out was how earnestly it talked about growing up. Ricky had to deal with real problems: school, bullies, feeling different. And his dad, Edward, had to grow up too, learning how to be a father, not just a buddy. It hit that perfect balance between escapism and emotional truth, which made it stick in the minds of kids who knew what it meant to feel a little lost. And let us be honest, that theme song did not help you forget it either. You can probably still hum it. Together we're gonna find our way. It was the kind of thing that lived in the back of your brain, waiting to resurface in a quiet moment or a long car ride. If you grew up watching Silver Spoons, you might not remember every plot or every episode, but you probably remember how it made you feel. Like being a kid did not mean being powerless, like family could start over, like life could be playful, chaotic, loving, all at once. That was the magic of it. And if you forgot that magic, now might be the perfect time to remember. You could not watch Perfect Strangers without falling in love with Balki Bartokomous. He came from the fictional island of Mypos, wore vests over sweaters in the middle of summer, and had a heart so big it practically broke through the screen. Then there was Larry Appleton, tightly wound, neurotic, trying way too hard to keep it together in a Chicago apartment that suddenly had to accommodate a wide-eyed cousin who had never used an elevator before. It was a classic odd couple setup, but it had something deeper going on, something that stuck with you even if you forgot all the punchlines. What made Perfect Strangers work was not just the culture clash. Though yes, there were many hilarious misunderstandings involving vacuum cleaners, pig statues, and whatever strange tradition Balki brought with him from Mypos. It was about connection. Balki and Larry were different in every way, but they were family, and they made each other better, even when Larry was losing his mind over a job interview, and Balki just wanted to dance the dance of joy. The show had heart, not the glossy, overproduced kind, but the kind that creeps up on you in a scene where one cousin messes everything up and the other forgives him anyway. It made room for silliness, like Balki trying to understand American slang, and still managed to teach a whole generation what patience, empathy, and kindness looked like between people who had no reason to get along, but did it anyway. Looking back, Perfect Strangers feels like a quiet rebellion against cynicism. It told you that the world might be confusing and complicated, but a little laughter and a lot of compassion could carry you through. It reminded kids who felt like outsiders that being different was not just okay. It was wonderful. It was joyful. It was worth dancing for. You probably forgot how good it felt to watch these two figure things out together. Maybe you did not remember the names. Maybe you forgot the storylines. But if you ever laughed when someone yelled, "Don't be ridiculous," then it is already part of you. And maybe that is what we all need again. Something silly, sincere, and just strange enough to feel like home. If you grew up in the 80s, the Hogan Family was the kind of show that felt like it had always been on. It started as Valerie, a family sitcom with Valerie Harper as the mom, but then it changed. She left the show. The name changed, and suddenly Sandy Duncan was the new mother figure, raising 3 boys with more heart than anyone expected. And somehow, even with that behind-the-scenes shuffle, it worked. It really worked. The Hogan Family had all the ingredients of a comforting sitcom: school troubles, sibling fights, family dinners, and those quiet moments where someone finally admitted what they were really feeling. But what made it different was how grounded it felt. These were not superheroes or millionaires or time travelers. They were a regular American family trying to get through each day, and sometimes just barely doing it. You had David, the oldest, too cool for school but clearly carrying more weight than he let on. Then the twins, Mark and Willie, who were classic opposites, one responsible, one reckless. Watching them stumble through adolescence, heartbreak, and growing up felt a little too familiar for anyone who was going through the same thing at home. And that was the point. It reflected the real, even if it wrapped it all up in a neat 22 minutes. There were laughs, sure, but there were also some incredibly emotional moments. The kind where someone breaks down in the kitchen or says something quiet right before walking out the door. Those moments stuck. You might not remember the episode titles or the air dates, but you remember the feeling of watching a family work through something hard and come out stronger. The Hogan Family was one of those shows that stayed under the radar, never as flashy as some others, but if you grew up with it, you felt like you really knew them. Like they were neighbors. Like they were friends. And now, decades later, maybe it is time to knock on that door again and see how much of that world you still carry with you. In the hierarchy of school sitcoms, head of the class stood alone. This was not about slackers or class clowns. This was about geniuses, the kind of kids who corrected teachers, aced every test, and still had time to argue about Shakespeare. But here is the twist. They were not perfect, not even close. And that is what made the show feel so real. Even while it was set in one of the smartest classrooms television had ever seen, you had Arvid, shy, awkward, brilliant. You had Darlene, confident, sharp, and always ready with a comeback. Dennis, who could solve a math equation with one hand and stir up trouble with the other. And at the center of it all was Mr. Moore, the laid-back teacher who knew the students were smarter than he was and was totally okay with that. He was not trying to be the star. He just wanted to help. The show tackled topics that most sitcoms avoided: academic pressure, self-worth, identity, and even more serious stuff like discrimination and politics. But it did it with a softness, a kind of quiet respect for the intelligence of both the characters and the viewers. It never talked down to you. It invited you to listen, to think, to laugh, and maybe to learn something about yourself. What set Head of the Class apart was that it never made the characters feel like punchlines. They were smart, yes, but they were also scared, awkward, messy, and very human. It was not about being the best student. It was about figuring out how to be a person, which, let's be honest, is harder than any test. If you forgot this show, you are not alone. It never had the biggest ratings or the loudest fan base. But for the kids who watched it, the ones who felt different or too smart or too unsure of how to fit in, it was a quiet kind of lifeline, a reminder that you did not have to be cool to be important, that being smart could be a story worth telling, and that even the brightest students need someone to believe in them. There was something about Kate and Allie that just felt lived in, not flashy, not loud, just real. Two divorced women raising their kids under the same roof in a cozy New York apartment, trying to make things work when the world kept telling them it was not supposed to. You do not always think of this one when people list their favorite 80s shows, but the people who grew up with it? They remember it like family. Kate was the free spirit. Allie was the traditionalist. Together, they were balance, raising kids, juggling jobs, figuring out how to start over in the middle of their lives without losing their minds. And they did it without husbands, without a big house, and without pretending like everything was okay when it was not. That was the quiet power of the show. It said, "We are here. We are figuring it out, and that is enough." The laughs were subtle, dry humor, sarcastic glances across the kitchen, the kind of moments that felt like they were written by someone who had actually lived through 1,000 messy mornings and late-night fridge raids. And through it all, Kate and Allie stuck together, not because it was easy, but because it mattered. Their kids, Emma, Jenny, and Chip, added their own chaos: teen drama, homework, arguments over the phone line. But it was never the over-the-top, exaggerated kind. These were the kinds of arguments that happened in your own house. You saw yourself in them. You heard your own voice coming out of those rooms. And maybe that is why the show still lingers in the memory, even if it got buried under glossier titles. It was a blueprint for the way real families live and love, for how women, especially women outside the mold, can create their own version of home. not with a perfect partner or a suburban fantasy, but with each other, with friendship, with persistence. It did not try to be revolutionary, but it quietly was. In an era of nuclear families and traditional sitcom tropes, Kate and Allie looked different. They sounded different. And they reminded viewers, especially young ones, that the people who show up for you do not always come in the package you expect. If you forgot about Kate and Allie, that is okay. But maybe now is the right time to remember the strength, the honesty, the warmth, and how sometimes your best second chance is standing right beside you in the kitchen, passing the coffee and saying, "We've got this." If you ever felt like you did not quite fit in, like you were one joke late or one outfit off, then Square Pegs probably hit you like a lightning bolt. It was awkward, it was sharp, and it was one of the most honest shows about high school that television dared to make in the early 80s. You had two best friends, Patty and Lauren, who were painfully aware they were not cool, and instead of turning them into underdog winners by episode 3, the show let them stay uncool, which made them feel incredibly real. Patty was played by Sarah Jessica Parker before she ever stepped foot in a pair of designer heels, and here she was all nerves and second guesses. She wanted so badly to be popular, but could not help but trip over her own honesty. Lauren was the dreamer, the schemer, always convinced she was just one clever plan away from finally fitting in. Together, they tried to navigate a high school that was basically a miniature version of the adult world, full of cliques, politics, confusion, and disappointment. Square Pegs did not glamorize anything. It did not try to be a public service announcement. It just let its characters exist. It let them fail. It let them make weird decisions. And that is what made it so quietly revolutionary. Because for the kids who were not the prom queens or football stars, for the ones sitting in the back of the cafeteria just hoping to get through lunch without embarrassment, this was the first time television really saw them. The dialogue was fast, dry, and way too clever for most sitcoms of the time. The fashion was gloriously 80s, all asymmetrical haircuts and oversized sweaters. And the soundtrack? Pure gold. New wave bands, synths, the kind of music that felt like it was just barely holding back its own awkward heartache. It only lasted one season, 18 episodes, but it left a mark. Because sometimes a short run is enough when every moment hits the truth so hard. It said what so many kids were thinking. That high school was hard, and not everyone got a makeover and a happy ending. Sometimes you just had to survive it, with a friend, with some sarcasm, and with the quiet hope that maybe someday your weirdness would be the best thing about you. So if you forgot Square Pegs, if it slipped through the cracks of your memory, let this be the moment you find it again. It was never trying to be cool, just honest. And sometimes that is the coolest thing of all. Highway to Heaven was not just a show, it was a feeling, a kind of quiet whisper in the middle of the noise. You might not remember every episode, but you remember what it gave you. Hope, comfort, something soft to hold on to when the world felt a little too sharp. Michael Landon played Jonathan Smith, an angel sent to Earth, trying to earn his wings by helping people. But he was not floating around in a robe or casting magic spells. He was just there, walking, listening, showing up at the right time with the right words. And his partner, Mark, tough on the outside, warm on the inside, was the perfect companion. A former cop who did not believe in much until this strange, quiet man came along and changed everything. Every episode was a new town, a new person in pain, a new reminder that even the smallest kindness could make a difference. It was not flashy, it was not fast, but it hit deep. It reminded people that healing could happen anywhere. In diners, in gas stations, in homes falling apart from grief. The magic of the show was in its stillness. It let moments breathe. It let characters talk. And it let viewers feel, really feel, what it meant to forgive, to fight, to hold on. There were no big explosions, no dramatic music swells. Just two men, a beat-up old truck, and the quiet promise that someone was looking out for you. For kids watching in the 80s, Highway to Heaven felt like a grown-up bedtime story, one that did not talk down to you. It believed that goodness mattered, that people could change, that even in a world full of hurt, someone might still show up and help you carry the weight. You might have forgotten the names, the details, but you probably remember the feeling in your chest when Jonathan turned to the camera and said something simple and true. You remember the way it made you want to be a better person, even if you did not know how. And you remember that theme music, soft, hopeful, like sunrise after a long night. Highway to Heaven was not trying to impress you. It was trying to remind you that people are good, that kindness is powerful, and that sometimes all it takes to change someone's life is to show up and say, "I believe in you." If you were a kid in the early 80s, there was something irresistible about The Greatest American Hero. A regular guy gets handed a superhero suit by aliens. No instructions, no training manual, just a pair of bright red tights and a whole lot of confusion. His name was Ralph Hinckley, and from the very first episode, it was clear he was in over his head. He could fly, sort of. He could become invisible, sometimes. Mostly, he just crashed into stuff. And we loved him for it. Ralph was a high school teacher, the kind who wanted to do the right thing but kept getting dragged into wild situations. The show paired him up with an FBI agent named Bill Maxwell, a gruff, no-nonsense guy who wanted to save the world but had to do it with the most reluctant superhero of all time. And then there was Pam, Ralph's lawyer girlfriend, who somehow managed to hold the whole operation together with patience, wisdom, and the occasional eye roll. This was not like other superhero stories. There was no Batcave, no secret fortress, no perfect moral compass. Ralph's powers were unpredictable, and half the time he wanted to give the whole thing back. But the message underneath all the bumbling and broken windows was clear. You do not have to be perfect to do good. You just have to try. The show hit that perfect sweet spot between comedy and sincerity. It made fun of itself, sure. The theme song alone was a wink at how ridiculous everything was, but then it would surprise you with a quiet moment, a moral choice. A little boy watching Ralph fly and suddenly believing in something bigger than himself. That was the magic of it. You might not remember every villain or plotline, but you remember how it made you feel. Like maybe someone ordinary, someone like you, could be a hero too. Not because they had powers, but because they had heart. And that is a kind of superpower we do not talk about enough anymore. So if the greatest American hero ever flew, or crashed, into your world, take a second and remember what it gave you. A laugh, a little hope, and a reason to believe that even the messiest of us can save the day. Misfits of Science was chaos. Glorious, nerdy, electric chaos. It was like someone grabbed a comic book, poured soda on it, and let it come alive on Friday night television. You had a team of outcasts with powers they barely understood, trying to do good while the world looked at them like a science fair gone wrong. And in the middle of it all was Dr. Billy Hayes, a scientist with no powers, just a lot of enthusiasm and absolutely no idea what he had signed up for. There was Johnny B., a rock guitarist who got electrocuted and came back with lightning-speed reflexes and the ability to shoot bolts of electricity from his hands. Elvin, a guy who could shrink to the size of a Barbie doll. And Gloria, a telekinetic teen who could move objects with her mind, usually after rolling her eyes at the chaos around her. Together, they were the Misfits of Science, and they were, well, a bit of a mess. But that was the charm. The 80s had a lot of shows about heroes, but this one was about the ones who did not get it right the first time, or the second, or the third. They were weird, they were unpredictable, but they meant well, and that meant everything. It did not last long, only one season. But the people who watched it never forgot it, because there was something honest in how messy it was, how much it tried to mix humor, action, and heart in a world that was not ready for it yet. It was a superhero show for kids who felt like they were always out of sync, a little too fast, too loud, too strange to fit in. The music, the neon, the chaotic energy, It all screamed 80s in the best possible way. And under the surface, there was a real question. What happens when you do not fit the mold? When your powers do not make sense? When the world says you are too much, too odd, too different? Misfits of Science said, be different anyway. Be weird, be loud, be kind. And maybe, just maybe, save the day in the process. Now, Voyagers. That was time travel with a heart. It was a history lesson wrapped in adventure, with a dashing guide and a curious kid hopping from one century to the next to fix what went wrong. Phineas Bogg was a Voyager, part of a secret society responsible for keeping history on track. He wore a leather vest, carried a magical device called an Omni, and looked like he stepped out of a romance novel. But he had one big problem. He was terrible at history. Enter Jeffrey, a brainy 11-year-old who knew more about world events than most adults. After a freak accident lands Bogg in Jeffrey's apartment, the two end up partnered by fate. They leap through time together, solving problems, saving key moments in history, and slowly forming a bond that felt as solid as anything television ever gave us. Each episode dropped them into a new moment. The Wright brothers before their flight, Harriet Tubman guiding people to freedom, Cleopatra making her way through the ancient world. And what made it stick, even years later, was that it never talked down to its audience. It made history thrilling, urgent, alive. But it also made it personal. Jeffrey was not just along for the ride. He asked the questions we would ask. Why does this matter? What if we mess it up? Why should we care? And Bogg, despite being a little clueless, always tried his best to answer. Sometimes with words, sometimes with action, always with heart. Voyagers was short-lived, only 20 episodes. But if you watched it, you probably learned more about history from this show than any classroom ever managed to teach. And more than that, you learned that doing the right thing mattered, even if no one would ever know you did it. There was something brave about a show that said the past was not set in stone, that it could be protected, changed, made better. And that even if you are just one person with no idea what you are doing, you can still make a difference. So if the Omni ever lit up in your memory, maybe it is time to go back, not just to history, but to the feeling that learning could be an adventure, that courage could be quiet, and that saving the future might just mean remembering the past. It's Your Move did not last long, but if you caught even a single episode, you knew exactly what kind of show it was. Fast, sharp, and just a little bit dangerous, all thanks to Jason Bateman playing one of the smartest, sneakiest teens ever to grace a television screen. His character, Matthew Burton, was not trying to save the world. He was trying to scam it, sell test answers, outsmart teachers, run cons out of his bedroom like it was a small business. And somehow, you rooted for him. The show worked because it dared to make its main character flawed. Really flawed. Matthew loved his mom, and deep down he wanted to do the right thing, but he also loved the thrill of pulling off the perfect plan. Then came the twist. His mom started dating a nice, boring writer named Norman. Matthew hated him instantly. What followed was a low-key war between teenage schemer and clueless adult, full of pranks, fake breakups, and wild cover stories. It was funny, but it was also kind of brilliant. A kid who felt invisible unless he was pulling strings behind the scenes. A single mom trying to find her happiness. A stepdad who just wanted to fit in. For a show that only aired a dozen episodes, it had a lot to say. About growing up, about control, and about what happens when you get a little too good at hiding what you feel. If you forgot about It's Your Move, you are not alone. But it was one of those blink-and-you-miss-it shows that left a deeper impression than anyone expected. And if you were paying attention, it taught you something even bigger, that being clever is great, but being honest might be braver. In a decade full of spies and secrets, Scarecrow and Mrs King gave us something different. A spy drama with heart, humor, and a suburban mom who could hold her own next to any action hero. Amanda King was just trying to get through the day when she crossed paths with Lee Stetson, codenamed Scarecrow, a government agent with a lot of charm and even more baggage. One envelope. One accidental moment And suddenly, Amanda was in the middle of international plots, undercover missions, and car chases in heels. But the real magic was not in the action. It was in the way the show treated Amanda. She was not trained. She was not supposed to be there. But she paid attention. She asked smart questions. She cared about people. And that turned out to be more powerful than any weapon. Week by week, she became more than just a civilian caught in the crossfire. She became a partner. Their relationship was the slow burn that kept you coming back. The tension, the trust, the moments where they almost said what they really felt. And in between, there were missions that took them from embassies to diners to the heart of political conspiracies. All while, Amanda tried to make it back in time to help her kids with homework. It was exciting. It was romantic. But more than anything, it was grounded in something rare. The idea that ordinary people can rise to the occasion. That courage is not always loud. And that sometimes, the best spies are the ones who never meant to be spies at all. Riptide was what happened when you threw together a muscle car, a helicopter, a nerd with a robot, and two private detectives who barely had a plan, and somehow made it all work. It was part action, part mystery, and all 80s, drenched in California sun and just enough sarcasm to keep you on your toes. Nick and Cody were ex-Army, best friends, and total opposites. One was cool and street smart, the other methodical and quiet. Together, they ran Riptide investigations off a boat and solved crimes in ways that did not always make sense but always got results. The heart of the show, though, was Murray, the computer genius with glasses and a robot named Roboz. He was awkward, brilliant, and the reason half of their plans did not end in disaster. The trio's chemistry gave the show its spark, part brotherhood, part bickering, but always loyal. They were not perfect detectives, but they cared, and they were relentless. Riptide was packed with car chases, helicopter escapes, secret codes, and old-school computer wizardry that looked cutting-edge at the time. It was stylish and sometimes ridiculous, but always fun. The kind of show you watched with wide eyes and a big grin. And under all the action, there was this simple truth. These were three guys trying to do the right thing in a world that kept getting messier. They were flawed. They got it wrong. But they showed up. They fought for the little guy. And they did it together. If Riptide faded from your memory, it might be time to bring it back. For the laughs, for the friendship, and for the reminder that even the wildest plans can work, as long as you have people who believe in you. It was bold. Too bold, maybe. Hot L Baltimore came from Norman Lear, the mastermind behind groundbreaking hits like All in the Family and Maude. Based on a stage play by Lanford Wilson, the show was set in a rundown hotel filled with outcasts, dreamers, and people society had quietly ignored. Prostitutes, illegal immigrants, transients, they all called the hotel home. And that was exactly the problem. In a time when primetime television was still finding its nerve, Hot L Baltimore pushed the line so far forward that many stations refused to air it at all. The show tackled sex, poverty, racism, and identity, topics that were still taboo even by Lear's fearless standards. There was no laugh track to soften the edges, just conversations that felt uncomfortably real. Critics were split. Some praised it as raw and unflinching. Others found it too confrontational. And while Lear had managed to make controversy work in the past, this time the balance tipped. Viewers were unsure whether they were supposed to laugh, cry, or change the channel. Ratings were modest. Affiliate pushback was fierce. After just 13 episodes, ABC pulled the plug. Hot L Baltimore was gone. But it left a mark. It showed just how hard television had to fight to reflect real life, and how easy it was for something honest to be labeled too dangerous. Today, the show is rarely mentioned, but it remains a reminder that bravery on screen often pays the price first. It was one of those shows that should have faded into parody, but somehow carved out a place in America's living rooms, and never really left. The Beverly Hillbillies followed the Clampett family, Simple folks from the Ozarks who struck oil and suddenly found themselves living in a Beverly Hills mansion they could not understand, surrounded by wealth they never asked for. The comedy was obvious, their backward ways clashing with the glittering absurdity of high society. But beneath the laughs was something quieter, something almost tragic. This was a story about people who never quite fit in, no matter how big their bank account got. Jed Clampett, the soft-spoken patriarch, always seemed like he was looking for something he had lost, even as the world laughed around him. Granny's wild wisdom and Ellie Mae's innocence made them caricatures on the surface, but real to anyone who knew what it meant to be treated like a joke just for being different. And America watched, week after week, because it reminded us that not every outsider is looking to blend in. But then, just like that, the Clampetts were gone. One day they were gracing prime time, the next they were a punchline, buried beneath newer shows with shinier backdrops and faster jokes. The laugh track stopped, and no one asked why. Today, the Beverly Hillbillies exists mostly in rerun limbo, a relic with a twang, treated like a fossil of a simpler time. But if you remember sitting cross-legged on the carpet, watching Granny try to make moonshine in a millionaire's kitchen, then you remember what television used to be. Odd, imperfect, human. And sometimes that was exactly what made it so rich. Profit was not just ahead of its time, it felt like it had fallen in from another dimension. Airing briefly in 1996, the show followed Jim Profit, a cold, calculating corporate executive who manipulated everyone around him to rise through the ranks. He slept in a cardboard box, spoke directly to the camera, and treated his job like a game of psychological warfare. Audiences did not know what to make of it. This was the same decade that gave us Friends and Frasier, shows built on warmth, laughter, and ensemble charm. Profit was the opposite. It was cold, cynical, and daring. Too daring. It was canceled after only a few episodes, with critics divided and networks scared. He was the snake in the boardroom, charismatic, empty-eyed, and terrifyingly believable. The show didn't just critique capitalism, it made you feel complicit in it. It asked the kind of questions no one wanted to answer, especially during prime time. But years later, something strange happened. Profit developed a cult following. People began to see it as the prototype for the morally ambiguous anti-heroes who would define television in the 2000s. Characters like Tony Soprano, Don Draper, and Walter White. In hindsight, it was not just edgy for the sake of it. It was visionary. The show explored themes of corporate corruption, trauma, and identity with unsettling depth. And Adrian Pasdar's performance as Prophet remains chilling and magnetic. It was television holding up a mirror to ambition and daring us not to look away. But in 1996, America blinked, and the show was gone. Still, the mark it left has never fully faded. You would think that turning one of the most successful comedies of all time into a television show would be a sure thing. But Delta House proved just how quickly lightning can escape the bottle. Based on the hit movie Animal House, this series tried to translate the chaos, raunch, and rebellion of the big screen into a weekly sitcom, only now under the watchful eye of network censors. And it showed. Gone were the wild parties, the edge, and the sense of danger. What remained was a watered-down echo of what once made people howl with laughter. Some of the original cast returned, including John Vernon as the uptight Dean Wormer, but without John Belushi's magnetic presence, the show felt like a tribute act. The humor was neutered. The stories went nowhere. ABC hoped that the mere association with the movie would be enough to draw in fans, but those fans were not fooled. This was not the Animal House they remembered. Ratings started strong but fell quickly. The characters, once riotous and wild, now felt flat and safe. Within 13 episodes, the show was off the air. Critics called it forgettable. Even the network seemed eager to move on. Delta House became another example of how television sometimes strangles the very spirit it hopes to bottle. You cannot fake irreverence, and you definitely cannot sanitize rebellion. Today, it is a curiosity, remembered mostly by die-hard fans and trivia buffs. a show that tried to cash in on chaos and wound up lost in the quiet. Some shows did not just reflect youth, they shaped it. California Dreams was a sun-soaked surfside time capsule of teenage life in the early 1990s. It followed a group of high school friends who formed a band, chasing stardom while juggling friendship, heartbreak, homework, and everything in between. The setting was always golden, the skies always blue, but the emotions hit deep. Every episode felt like a page out of a diary someone forgot to lock. Behind the catchy guitar riffs and pop lyrics, this was a show about change, about how friendships bend under pressure, how dreams evolve, and how growing up always means leaving something behind. The characters, from Jake's cool loner persona to Tiffany's grounded kindness, were more than tropes. They were reflections of us. They made mistakes, chased the wrong people, fought over the wrong things, and then picked up the pieces, sometimes with a song, sometimes with silence. California Dreams offered a vision of youth that was both dreamy and devastating. It made you want to learn guitar. It made you want to call your friends. It made you wonder if high school was really just a stage for a story you might not fully appreciate until it is over. The show ended after 4 years, not with a bang, but a quiet fade. It was gone before most people realized how much it mattered. Now it lives as a soft echo from the corner of nostalgia, waiting for someone to remember how it felt to watch young people sing their hearts out while the tide rolled in behind them. The Colgate Comedy Hour was not just another variety show, it was an event. Airing live from 1950 to 1955, it brought the electric chaos of the stage directly into the homes of millions. Hosted by a rotating cast of comedy legends like Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, Eddie Cantor, and Abbott and Costello, the show captured a kind of energy that no scripted sitcom ever could. It was unpredictable, unpolished, and wildly entertaining. Every week was a gamble, a new experiment in whether or not the comedians could top their last performance. And more often than not, they did. It was a golden age of television in the raw, where mistakes happened on air and the audience loved it more for that. You felt the tension in every live performance. Anything could go wrong, and sometimes it did. But that chaos made it human, alive, and impossible to turn away from. It was the only place where you could see slapstick, song, and celebrity all within the same breath. And at its best, it felt like the whole country was in on the joke at the same time. The competition with The Ed Sullivan Show was fierce, and at times it looked like Colgate might actually win. But time plays favorites, and while Ed Sullivan became immortal, Colgate Comedy Hour became something else, a memory. It disappeared almost as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving only clips and scattered references behind. Yet for those who watched it, those Sunday nights were unforgettable. You did not just laugh. You roared. You shouted across the room. You felt alive. It was theater, comedy, and chaos wrapped into 1 hour of brilliance. It had glitz, it had charm, and it had the Las Vegas Strip, but it never had the audience. Who's Watching the Kids was a sitcom that centered on 2 aspiring showgirls trying to make it big in Sin City while raising their younger siblings in the process. The idea alone seemed like a classic blend of heartfelt family drama and zany showbiz antics. It had neon, sequins, and sass, along with the tried-and-true formula of mismatched roommates balancing dreams and responsibility. But the series never found its footing. The humor felt thin. The stories leaned heavily on awkward misunderstandings and slapstick gags that even the laugh track could not salvage. The kids were mostly relegated to the background, and the adult characters lacked the warmth that audiences were used to from family-centric shows. NBC hoped it would capture the same lightning that made Laverne and Shirley a hit, especially since it came from the same producers. But it missed the heart, and it missed the timing. Audiences in the late 1970s were already shifting toward more grounded, character-driven sitcoms. The over-the-top Vegas flair and cartoonish setups just felt out of touch. Ratings declined quickly. After only 11 episodes, the show was quietly pulled. It has since faded into near-total obscurity. For a show that promised both showbiz sparkle and family tenderness, it managed to deliver neither. Watching it now feels like digging up a discarded script from a past that tried too hard to be funny without ever being real. A footnote in television history, barely remembered, but maybe, just maybe, that is for the best. There was no script, no set, no characters, just kids being kids. Bug Juice was one of the first reality series made for younger viewers, and it hit like a warm, unfiltered memory of summer that never fully leaves you. Set at real American summer camps, it followed groups of preteens and teens through weeks of friendship, homesickness, awkward crushes, personal growth, and emotional firsts. There were no plot twists, just real life, captured in all its messy honesty. You saw kids cry when they missed home. You saw them celebrate small victories. You saw them form bonds that felt bigger than the campgrounds they occupied. Bug Juice was not trying to entertain, it was trying to reflect. And in doing so, it did something more powerful. It made its audience feel less alone. It captured the exact moment when innocence starts to fracture, but wonder still holds on. There was beauty in the awkward silences, the shy glances, and the honest confessions of kids just beginning to understand themselves. For kids watching at home, these campers were mirrors. They were the same age. They had the same fears, the same jokes, the same hopes. The camera did not glamorize them, it simply followed them. That simplicity was its strength. It captured something so ephemeral, what it means to be on the edge of growing up, just for a moment. The show ended without ceremony, its cast scattered, its legacy quietly stored in the minds of a generation that still remembers how the campfire felt. In a media world obsessed with fiction, Bug Juice told a small, beautiful truth. Sometimes the most unforgettable stories are the real ones. The Texas Wheelers was a sitcom that aired for a blink in time, just 4 episodes in 1974 before it disappeared from the airwaves. It told the story of a widowed father, Zach Wheeler, played by Jack Elam, trying to raise his 4 kids in rural Texas after returning home. The tone was rough around the edges but warm at the core, an unusual blend of grit and sentiment. One of the kids was played by a young Mark Hamill just before the world would know him as Luke Skywalker. But even that bit of trivia was not enough to save the show. It premiered during a time when audiences were craving escapism, not slice-of-life realism wrapped in Southern grit. The laugh track felt out of place. The characters talked more than they joked. There was a quiet honesty in every scene, moments that felt like they came from someone's real life, not a writer's room. The show made no effort to dazzle or distract. It just wanted to sit with you and tell the truth. It was less about punchlines and more about pauses, silences, and hard-earned smiles. And instead of punchlines, there were long, quiet moments of reflection. Maybe too many. The Texas Wheelers did not fail because it was bad. It failed because it was honest. And in 1974, honest sitcoms did not get very far. But those who remember it remember something rare. A network show that tried to say something deeper under its dusty boots and denim jackets. It had an emotional backbone. It wanted to show how family bonds are messy, complicated, and not always tied together with a neat bow. Its cancellation felt like closing the book before the first chapter was over. Yet in those few episodes, there was something sincere, something that lingers, the kind of sincerity that could only be appreciated years later. The concept was pure late 60s brilliance. A group of idealistic college students crash land on a mysterious island where the adult world no longer exists. No teachers, no parents, no government, just a blank slate to rebuild society from scratch. The new people was meant to be bold, a mirror held up to the counterculture generation. It blended themes of Lord of the Flies and Gilligan's Island, but with a serious tone and moral undertones. And yet, for all its ambition, the show never really worked. It aired on ABC as part of a half-hour drama experiment and never had time to breathe. Episodes felt rushed, ideas half-formed. The writing wrestled with big questions: freedom, power, equality, but the characters remained shallow and their struggles felt like debates rather than drama. The sets were plain, the stakes low, Viewers tuned in out of curiosity but quickly lost interest. Ratings sagged. The network gave it 17 episodes, but the cultural revolution it wanted to ignite never came. What should have been groundbreaking ended up feeling like a lecture. Even the cast, filled with fresh-faced newcomers, seemed lost in the tone shifts. There was potential in every frame, but no spark, no urgency, no heart. Today, The New People is more a forgotten experiment than a failure, one of those rare shows where the premise outshined every part of the execution, a utopia left unexplored, a generation's voice that never found the right words. Before inclusion became a buzzword, Hang Time quietly lived it. This teen sitcom was centered on a high school basketball team, with one twist. One of the star players, Julie Connor, was a girl, and the series never treated that as a gimmick. It explored what it meant to break into a boy's world, not with magic or rebellion, but with sheer talent and quiet determination. Julie was strong not because she was written to be, but because she had to be. The show did not just focus on the court, it dove into race, gender, friendship, and pressure, real issues with no easy answers. It did so with warmth, humor, and sincerity, never talking down to its young audience. Coach Katowinski, the wise mentor figure, often acted as the voice of reason, but never the voice of perfection. Hang Time did not push boundaries, it lived within them, and still showed us how to stretch them from the inside. Its impact was subtle, but deeply felt by viewers who saw themselves in characters finally playing for more than just a win. The teens stumbled, they failed, they fought, and through it all, the team came first. The bond that formed on the hardwood felt genuine, earned, and familiar to anyone who ever played a sport or tried to find their place. Hang Time ran for 6 seasons, but somehow it still slipped through the cracks of nostalgia. Maybe because it never screamed for attention. It just showed up, week after week, doing what great shows do, telling stories that made people feel seen. It was never just about basketball. It was about believing that the game, like life, had room for everyone. Beauty and the Beast was a fairy tale set in a world of concrete and shadows. From 1987 to 1990, it told the story of Catherine, a lawyer in New York City, and Vincent, a noble beast living beneath the streets in a hidden world. Linda Hamilton brought strength to Catherine, while Ron Perlman, under layers of prosthetics, gave Vincent a quiet, poetic soul. Their love was forbidden, impossible, and entirely real. The show combined crime drama with fantasy, romance with action. It should not have worked, but it did. It spoke to something deep in its audience, a longing for connection in a world that felt increasingly cold. The underground world Vincent lived in was not just a fantasy setting, it was a metaphor for safety, for community, for a different kind of beauty. The show whispered that love could exist without conditions, without judgment, even without surface-level attraction. It did not mock emotion. It embraced it like something sacred. And in doing so, it gave viewers permission to believe in gentleness, even in a brutal world. Beauty and the Beast earned a devoted fan base, one that continues to cherish the show today. But in the mainstream, it has faded. Newer generations barely know it existed, and that is a shame, because for all its melodrama and mythical flourishes, it was sincere. It believed in love without irony. It dared to show vulnerability in a genre that often avoided it. There was a time when The Starlost was supposed to be a game changer, a Canadian-American science fiction epic created by legendary author Harlan Ellison. It promised something rare for television in the early 1970s, a deep, thoughtful exploration of humanity's future. The premise was solid. Earth had been destroyed. The last of humanity lived aboard a gigantic space ark, divided into sealed biospheres, each preserving a different culture. But the execution? That was another story entirely. Everything that could go wrong did. The budget was slashed early in production. Sets were cheap, effects were amateurish, dialogue dragged on endlessly, and characters stumbled through episodes that felt like half-finished thoughts. Ellison was so disillusioned he removed his name from the credits, What was meant to be a rich, compelling universe became a series of dimly lit rooms filled with awkward pacing and empty revelations. Viewers who tuned in expecting the next Star Trek found themselves stranded in a slow-moving dream where nothing ever really happened. Ratings fell, critics turned cold, and by the end of its short run, just 16 episodes, The Star Lost had become a cautionary tale, a reminder that big ideas are not enough without the tools to bring them to life. It remains a fascinating failure. It is the kind of show that leaves behind more questions than answers, and perhaps that is why some still seek it out today. Not to enjoy it, but to witness the fall of something that could have been great, a star that never quite made it into orbit. Before nostalgia became an aesthetic, Margie brought it to life with pink wallpaper and cloche hats. Set in the roaring 20s but aired in the early 1960s, this sitcom was a charming, retro escape into a world that felt dreamlike, even to its original audience. Margie Clayton was the all-American girl, witty and wide-eyed, caught between homework and heartbreak. She lived in a time of flappers and prohibition, but her struggles felt familiar. Parents who didn't understand, boys who did not listen, friends who came and went. Every episode was like opening an old photo album, sepia-toned, soft around the edges, and a little too perfect to be real. That was the magic. The show was more than just a period piece. It was a bridge between generations. Adults saw their youth in it. Kids saw a version of growing up that felt both exciting and safe. But it did not last. 1 year. That was all Margie got. The network said the ratings were weak, but the truth is, Margie's quiet storytelling could not compete with louder, faster shows. And so it vanished, tucked into the drawer of television history like a love letter no one had the heart to throw away. Today, barely anyone remembers Margie. But if you do, you probably remember how she made you feel, like being young was something you never wanted to let go of. The Ben Stiller Show was where sarcasm met sincerity, sketch met structure, and comedy took a slightly weirder turn. It aired in various forms from 1992 to 1995, first on MTV and later on Fox, but barely lasted a season in either place. Still, for those who caught it, it felt like something new. Ben Stiller, then just beginning his rise, hosted and led the sketches, joined by future legends like Janine Garofalo, Andy Dick, and Bob Odenkirk. The writing was sharp, offbeat, and unafraid to punch both up and sideways. It parodied pop culture with a precision that felt less like ridicule and more like dissection. But it was too niche, too weird, too smart for a mass audience that was still tuned into sitcom comfort food. There was a sketch where Ben played Tom Cruise in a fake action movie trailer, and it felt more accurate than the real thing. The humor was meta before meta was a buzzword. You weren't just laughing, you were being let in on a creative secret. Ratings never clicked. Fox pulled the plug, but the echoes of its style, fast edits, character-driven absurdity, and deep-cut satire are all over modern comedy. In many ways, it was a blueprint, a test run for what would become the tone of shows like Mr. Show, The Office, or even sketch segments on late night. The Ben Stiller Show proved that comedy could be thoughtful without being preachy, and even though it was gone in a flash, it left behind a creative footprint that never really faded. Marty Feldman was impossible to forget. Those wide eyes, that surreal humor, that presence. Already a star in Britain, Feldman brought his signature style to American television in the Marty Feldman Comedy Machine. It was a sketch show that took absurdity seriously. The pace was fast, the visuals wild, and the tone unapologetically weird. Feldman was the kind of performer who could turn nonsense into poetry, if you were willing to go along for the ride. But American audiences in the early 1970s were not quite ready for it. The show was a whirlwind of bizarre sketches, musical numbers, and animated interludes. One moment he was impersonating a dictator in a tutu, the next he was playing chess with a chicken. It had more in common with Monty Python than with anything on American prime time. And that was the problem. The cultural gap was just a little too wide. Audiences were used to the familiar rhythm of variety shows, not the frenetic chaos of British surrealism. Viewers were confused, advertisers were wary, critics admired Feldman's genius but questioned the format's accessibility. Despite strong backing and an ambitious slate of episodes, the comedy machine sputtered out after just one season. Feldman would go on to have success in films, especially with roles like Igor in Young Frankenstein. But this television experiment became more of a cult curiosity than a breakthrough. Today, it is a relic of creative risk, a show that swung for the fences and missed, but missed in a way that still dazzles. Not all brilliance lands. Sometimes it just flashes once and vanishes. In a sea of over-the-top teen dramas and goofy comedies, the mystery files of Shelby Woo stood out by being both grounded and bold. Shelby Woo was not a pop star or a secret princess. She was just a smart, curious teenager with a badge-shaped dream and a knack for uncovering the truth. Set in a sleepy Florida town, the show followed Shelby as she interned at the local police department while juggling school, friendships, and all the usual teenage trials. But Shelby's world was not just locker notes and after-school crushes. It was suspects, clues, and dead ends. She was relentless, observant, brave, and most importantly, she listened. It was not just about solving mysteries. It was about learning who you are when no one else sees you clearly. Shelby's quiet tenacity made her a role model for kids who felt underestimated, unseen, or overlooked. Where other shows gave us caricatures of teens, Shelby Woo gave us someone who felt real. Not perfect, not invincible, just determined. The show had a quiet confidence to it. It did not rely on special effects or trendy lingo. It let the stories carry the weight. It gave kids the benefit of the doubt that they could handle mystery, complexity, and moral ambiguity. That maybe they wanted more than just punchlines. Shelby broke the mold not by being loud, but by being thoughtful. She was proof that curiosity could be cool, that asking questions could be power. The series slowly faded from the spotlight as flashier content took over, but it left behind something rare, a girl detective who did not need to be superhuman to be unforgettable. If one of these shows sparked a memory, share it below, like the video, and subscribe for more blasts from the past.